Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Connecticut at Your Service. Here on Soundview TV, coming to you live each Tuesday at 6:30, where we feature individuals who are making a difference in the community by the way they live, serve, and work. And I can't tell you how excited I am. I know that I say that every episode, but I really am. When you have people in the community that you know, that you love, that you respect, and are just changing the world by allowing other people to find their voice, I can't even tell you what that means, not only for myself, for other women in our community and women throughout the country. So I have to start with first a hello, Lori. Lori, this is Dr. Lori Monaco. Say hello.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
So I just want to, we've known each other for a minute. And I remember that the first time that we met was at a show because you were a panelist.
Yes.
And it was an event empowering women, and you were talking about your personal story of how that really was a door opener, that you allowed other people to find their voice. Since then, you're a teacher, a coach, a speaker, you're co-host a daily morning talk show that comes on a couple days a week. Tell me a little bit about you and kind of how did that bring you to where you are today? And then we're going to get into all the stuff about your book.
Well, first I want to say that I'm happy to be here because I love Carmen. Carmen is fabulous. So what was your question again? Because I was preoccupied with talking
Tell me
you
about
up.
you, your family, kind of what led you into the work that you're doing. Then I'm going to formally introduce you before we start too. But we always start the show exactly the same. Tell us a little bit about you and kind of what inspires you.
So basically, I've been a speaker and a teacher for about 2 decades. Chiropractic physician by trade for over 23 years, and I've always been in the holistic field. But what happened, actually, what really shifted me was about 7 years ago. I hit like the lowest point in my life, and it was something that happened to me. My whole personal life completely blew up. And it was something that I did not expect. And it sent me into a really, really bad depression that lasted about 6 months. 3 weeks of it, I was suicidal. And it was in that really dark place. People say sometimes the dark night of the soul. My dark night of the soul was not one night, it was 6 months. But what happened was it ended up being my greatest awakening. I spent the better part of 3 decades of my life just not living the life that I really wanted to live and not even knowing who I was. And having to hit that rock bottom and coming out of it and then realizing, okay, I've got to make some big changes. Not taking ownership of the things that happened by what the other people did, but taking ownership of the roles that I played. So it ended up becoming this huge transformation for me and shifted me so much that within a year of working on myself, I said, you know what, I don't ever want somebody to be in this much depression, to be that lost. And so I decided to actually add coaching to the business, and that's when I became a coach. So I've been a coach for about 4 years, no, probably 5 years now, and
you understand.
And love it.
You understand what people have gone through because you have lived experience with that.
Yeah.
So, and you probably call them on their stuff and be like, listen, you've got to move on, move out. And, sometimes that's not easy. And I know that you speak often to that. Matter of fact, when you speak in some of your coaching is very specific, right?
It is.
So
yeah.
What do you call it?
So what I do is I work specifically with individuals who have been in narcissistic or toxic relationships, and whether it could be a parent or a significant other or a sibling, a boss, and then individuals who have been abused by them, so something called narcissistic abuse syndrome. And so I also work with people who have depression, anxiety, PTSD, and CPTSD as a result of relationships, And so that's what I specialize in now. And I do work with men and women, but mostly work with women.
And you're helping them find their voice. I think that is, what of all the things that you do and all the things that we should be really proud of. I just want to read it because I don't want to forget it. And this is in her book. It's called Her Badass Story, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think part of the reason why I want to make sure that I read it is because, you know, these things happen no matter how much money you make, no matter what background you have. You know, we're all vulnerable in a way to relationships that are not good for us, and you've managed to turn that around and help other women find their voice. So it says Dr. Lori Monaco is the founder and CEO of Align Yourself, Inc. She is a narcissistic, toxic relationship abuse coach, mindfulness teacher, workshop facilitator, and chiropractor. So as I was reading that, I'm like, you know, she really is helping the mind, the body, and the spirit. I'm like, that just seems like so right, you know? It says Lori earned her professional doctorate degree from Sherman College, and then you got your coaching certification from Heart Math, the Institute of Heart Math. It goes on more about her education, but I think one of the things that I read on here that really kind of inspired me is the Journal of Hope. You sit on the board for that group,
yes.
right?
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that, because it sounds like that one and Angels Give Back. So I would love to know a little bit about those two and your role in it.
So the irony is that the founder of JOH, Journal of Hope, Diana Negron, and this is Journal of Hope is for it provides journals and training for individuals like children school age, usually middle school, high school. We're working towards younger people as well, and gets them to love and understand how important journaling is to provide a voice for yourself. It's especially in these times, you know, when there's so much stress still around and children can't really find their voice very well. And so Journal of Hope provides, you know, training and support and journals for individuals that would love to, you know, really step up and get that voice, be heard.
So your other one is Angels Give Back. Tell me a little bit about that, because that one's new to me.
So Angels Give Back board is, it's part of the Angels Are Networking group, and they're out of Atlanta, and we work as a group to help each other and then also help other people on the outside of that group. So like within our business, we're all business professionals, and we connect other people. If we say, oh, you know, this person does this, so we're going to connect you with that person. And so that's the whole point of that, is to be a connector, but also spread, you know, the goodness, you know, the kindness, and it's not just about our little board. It's to reach out to other people beyond that. That one is more specific to the network itself as opposed to JOH, where JOH is like just reaches out to anybody
that wants to participate, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So on here it says that you are known as the badass Buddha, and that you're a disruptor, that you're unapologetic, that you're courageous, spiritually grounded, and magically orgasmic. I think I have heard that on your talk show almost every morning that I listen.
But I have to give kudos because that term came from, you know, Margarita.
Your co-host on the show.
And our
one
friends.
Of the authors.
Yep. And that she coined that term, and it's a term that it's very empowering to women. So I have to make sure I reference her because that's her term. But you know, I never ever thought of myself as a disruptor. I didn't like to disrupt anything. I didn't like to cause problems with anything.
Most
you know?
of us don't, but sometimes we do anyway, right?
I liked sitting. I mean, listen, I've always been very talkative. I've never had a problem. You don't want to sit next to me on the plane. I'll tell you my whole life story. But I've never had that problem before, but at the same time, I still played very small, and I didn't really want to like make that big of a deal. So I never really thought of myself as, you know, unapologetically courageous, disruptor, and definitely not a badass. And it really wasn't until this awakening, and then even probably like 3 years of still working on myself, because you never end. Transformation is lifelong. You're just always working on yourself. But it wasn't really until 3 years passed that I really started to come into that. And it really actually wasn't until we did the Viva Café con Leche show, which that was you created that. You came up with that idea.
You guys are doing this. So
but you came up with the idea. But I didn't, we were talking about it, say, oh, let's have some nicknames. And I said, oh, well, I'm going to say call myself this, because I had been toying around with it for a couple of months. And even the first couple of months of the show, I didn't even feel comfortable saying it.
Oh, but you've coined it now because it rolls off
the
the tongue now.
Right, and the funny part is that I'm like, you know what? I really am. Like, it makes sense because it describes the two sides of me, the strong side and the compassionate side. And so I just decided to own it. And when you own something, once you really step into it and you own it, it's the most incredible thing that you can ever do for yourself.
Freeing, right? Because we have to take the thoughts that we have. This is like a PLTI. Those that are listening know that you have to take what you were thinking and voice it. So you have to bring it to the front, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that so I just want to get into the book. Let's
get into the book.
So you have volume 1 and 2.
Correct.
And these are all stories of women sharing, and it's their truth, right? We were talking about this a little bit earlier today, that it's about their truth of how they've overcome and what they've, managed to achieve, and sometimes when they thought that they weren't going to.
Yes.
That you even referenced that sometimes in our worst, we come out into the light. And when I was reading this book, so this was the first volume that I do have autographed by my friend Margarita is in here. And I think you had autographed it for me too. But the stories that were shared in here were emotional, heart-wrenching, inspiring, hurtful. It spoke about betrayal, like the different stories of what women went through to get to that point where, you know what, they're going to share their story about how they overcame that. So one, I want to know kind of how did you come up with this concept and why is it called Badass?
Well, I think the reason it's called Badass is probably
badass story.
Yeah, her badass story. I think the reason that word got in there had to do with the fact that I had been really reading a lot and following a lot of Jen Sincero's stuff, which she wrote You Are a Badass, and among other books. And really, again, stepping into that, like redefining it. Like I put it in I think it's in the intro in the first volume, as I joke about it and say, like, our age group, that term is always referred to as like a biker dude, like some biker dude, like with like hair all over his face and all that stuff. And we've redefined it, and thanks to her. And so we as women have grabbed a hold of that and said, you know what, I am one, or they are one, or she is one. And so, but prior to this, I had always been very intrigued by stories, right? So we all know that, like when you're in business, you're taught that that's the story is really the big thing. Like you want to connect with people, you tell your story, or tell a story. And so I was always very intrigued by people's story. I've been since I was a teacher. Students would come up to me and they would start telling me about their personal lives, and I would listen to what they were going through. Sometimes it was to get out of doing their homework, but other times it was, some really heavy stuff, And number one, I felt very honored that they felt comfortable enough to tell me that. And then I started to think, my goodness, like these women are just, and men too, are just going through and just pushing through, even though all these things are going on around them. And then I had to sit and think about my own personal story and say, wow, I kind of did the same thing. That is kind of badass. And then I said, oh, this would be great to have as like a talk show. And so I actually pitched the idea, but I sent the idea, I didn't pitch it personally, to the Gaia Network. I never heard anything back, but I only did it once. But I thought to myself, you know what, I still want to go with this. And then when I was presented with the idea of doing a compilation book from a publisher, I said, that's right now, that's going to be the platform.
This is going to be like chicken soup for the soul.
Yeah, that was my intention.
And it immediately reminded me of that. So when the women shared their stories, because, there's always, people say there's always two sides, and the women, they're very short stories. Yeah. If you have an opportunity, you want to look into it, you want to get a copy, just, go on to Dr. Lori's website. It's, what is it? DrLoriMonaco.com. Go on to her website and read about her, get information, talk about all these relationship things, but really when I said to myself, how do women tell their story? Because, I imagine they probably got a little pushback over that. That's
time.
not how they?
There was a pushback from themselves, because you're being very vulnerable.
Yeah.
You're being very, you feel
and
very
it's
exposed.
very personal. They're very
exactly.
personal stories.
And so they start to write it, and then they're like, oh my God. I mean, we've had women having panic attacks, when we were getting ready to release, especially in the first one. Then some of them would share it with their family, and the family they got the pushback, But in the end, every single person that published, whether it was in the first or the second volume, they all felt the same way, that it needed to happen. It was very cathartic, that they afterwards, they felt like they didn't really care what anybody thought, because this is what their life really was, and they came out of it, and this is who they became. And so, I, as the head author, I'm in charge of everybody, right? So
you're the mama.
I am,
author,
right?
mama
And
author.
so what was happening was that they're writing their stories, and they're texting me or emailing me going, oh my God, like I feel really uncomfortable. I don't know how this is going to happen. And I would have to get on there and sit and speak to them and work with them. And I loved taking that role, like that nurturing, because even I did it. Like I put mine, and as soon as I sent it to the publisher for the first edit, I was like, oh my goodness, like this is really this is going to be published. And so Margie ended up being my person to talk to say, okay, just calm it down, be okay with it,
And it's just amazing, because I think that actually opened the door for other women, because if you take a look at the first volume and the second volume, it's almost double. So
Yes.
We're going to talk about that in a second. Hello, caller, and welcome to Connecticut at your service. Do you have a question for our guest, Dr. Lori?
Hi, yes, I do. I was hearing you talk about your book and the people that you have also write in the book and feature on it. I was wondering if you feel like people who have been in abusive situations, they should do some writing as a way to heal, even if they don't go on to publish it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yep. That is a very cathartic thing to do. In fact, I coach the clients to do that, my clients, all the time. You can do something that's also really valuable, not only just grab a journal and write your story out, but you can also do something called stream of consciousness writing. So sometimes you have a block, or you don't know exactly what to say. You just start writing, and just write anything. You could be literally writing, I don't know what to write, so I'm just going to write anything.
It'll come to me.
Exactly. And then you focus more on your story. And because it's more personal to you, usually you want to keep it where people know, not everybody can grab it, and then they can look at it, and you can look at it yourself. But absolutely, I think that sometimes that's the best way to get past trauma, is to write it. And yeah, you may never publish it, but putting it on paper is very different than saying it to somebody or keeping it in your head.
But it's still getting it out.
Oh,
and
definitely.
I think the most important thing is that, especially since COVID, I have to tell you, I think whatever we were holding, we just let it out.
Yes.
Like insecurities, it's like, no, this is the way I want to live. No, this is how I want to work. So it actually gave people some lift. It's different. They're coming out of this when you're thinking that your whole life may change. It's like, I'm not settling anymore.
Right.
Right. And giving voice to that, and encountering people like you that helps them find the voice and say, yes, you can. Because I'm taking a look at the book, and it's almost like double. And I remember, I'm sorry, caller, before I keep rattling on. Did you have another question?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you for
Thank
calling,
you.
and make sure you keep watching.
But further with what she was asking, that sometimes we get stuck on, I have to write it in such a way, and that's why stream of consciousness is nice. But I got to tell you, when my personal life completely blew up, I mean, when I tell you I was not ready for what happened, and that story's in the first volume, but I remember, I would write anywhere. I would write on a journal by hand. I would write on my phone in my notes. I would type it. And there were some times where it was just all explicits. It was just like, the bad words and just over and over the same sentence over and over and over, just like a whole page of just this one sentence, basically telling them where to go. And I look back at it now and I go, wow, because I know where I was at that moment, the anger, the humiliation, being so distraught. And it was so emotional, even if it was just one sentence repeated, but it said so much with saying so little.
And the whole idea, writing is just one way to get it out. People do that through poetry and song and acting and, whatever that allows you to find your voice. We're here on Soundview Community TV, so make sure that you're watching us and continue to watch us. But this is a station that's for the people, by the people. So if you ever want to bring her badass, and I don't know if we can call it all of that, but we might be able to call it something else, and have a voice here, because tell me, so you did the first book.
Yeah.
And I remember when a lot of women had a lot of questions, right? That they were kind of fearful of getting, whatever the information was out, who was going to read it. At the end of the day, I think everyone agreed that it was their truth and that they were allowed to do that. And then you did the second book. Matter of fact, with the first book, you actually did a tour, right? That you were actually, because the authors are not just from Connecticut.
No,
Where were the authors from your first and second book?
Let's see. In the first book, we had somebody from Atlanta. We had somebody from Colorado. We had New Jersey, Massachusetts, Florida. The second book, we had California, Florida. We had Costa Rica. We had Oregon. Let's see where else. People were all over the place on that one.
And even your talk show that you do in the morning, whoever can log on from wherever they are.
I remember the beauty of internet.
I remember your co-host, Margarita Chapman Rodriguez, who's also an author and an artist and all of that in her own right, that she took like a 500-mile trek and was like writing and things like that. So whatever feeds your soul, I think that people have the opportunity. But she's one of your authors that's actually just like you in both books. So what do you think? And they're very different stories. But what do you think that, because there were some people that were like, I don't know, and now they're like, when are you publishing? What are you doing next? So what do you think was different between book one and book two?
Well, I learned a lot. I learned a lot as the head author. I learned that nourishing the story and nourishing the individual was really, really important. Not that I didn't know it in the first one, I just didn't step into it as much. I definitely stepped into it for this one and decided that is exactly what I want to do for each of them. I had envisioned like probably 4 or 5 volumes. And so for
it's
me,
going to be more than that.
Yeah, I think so.
It's going to be a lot more than that.
And so I envisioned, doing these, but I didn't really envision the role that I would completely play. And I love the role that I'm playing now. So there was a maturity for the second book. There was also an ability to get the stories out for the women and to let them know that it was okay to share it and everything.
You were editing some, right? Weren't you editing
of the
stories and all of that?
Yep.
So I just think that you're incredible, not only in all the things that you do, honestly, about healing the mind, the body, and the spirit. So you've done a second volume, and I think this one had had more.
There was 9 of us in the first one. 12 of us in the second one, and
they come from all different walks. I know that you guys can't see it, but these are all incredible women with their stories. So Dr. Lori, tell me, what's next? What's next for her badass story?
So we just had a summit that played out a couple of weeks ago. It is available on YouTube and online, and we're posting it on our social media.
What's the summit?
The summit was to meet. We did it with both books, to meet with the authors.
Awesome, and that's available online?
Yes, and that was where you can be invited and you can actually ask questions and be a part of it.
Wonderful, I love that.
And so that will be available on social media. And then we're doing Volume 3. Volume 3 is set to, tentative release date is February 27th for 2023. And we are currently looking for authors. And we are looking to try to do 15 to 20 this time around. And we already have we have 3 signed on and 2 that are looking to sign on this week. So it's coming along.
So the information is on your website for that?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. And this is going to be a yearly thing, right? So if someone doesn't sign on by this deadline, they can definitely go onto your website, share their story and all of that. I think that it's just absolutely incredible, the fact that you're giving voice to where people thought that they couldn't share that, couldn't do that. What are some of the other things that you have coming out? You just did on your talk show that it was domestic violence,
Yeah.
which seems like almost really appropriate to have you here and talking about that, because some of those stories involve that.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, so what's next? Well, so you're going to do your 3rd book, and you're doing some speaking engagements. You're still going on with your show, and you're coaching still.
Yes. Yep.
What's next for you and for the other women that are your authors?
So for me, I've created a membership program for the coaching that I do. And specifically, it's really more specific towards women so that they have that extra support. Although I do see a great need for men. The more I've gotten into understanding narcissistic behavior, usually you see a lot more men and then that are abusing women, but it's uncanny to see how many women are being abusive to men, and they're very underserved men, because who do they go to? They get laughed at, or you're letting a woman control you, and so there's definitely need. I'm working with an organization that is creating an outlet for law enforcement dealing with that type of behavior, toxic relationships. So he's out of Florida, and it's a phenomenal organization for first responders. And then for the authors, just providing a voice, always providing a voice.
So I just wanted to just kind of like end off as we talk about people sharing their stories, that this may be the very first time. If there's any type of domestic violence, or people need help in trying to get their story out, or just need help, just make sure that you're reaching out to 988. We've given this information out before. 211 in Connecticut for resources, and 911 if individuals need help. So Lori, just really like in 30 seconds, tell me what you're thinking.
I'm thinking, thank you for having me, and listen, never be shy about who you are, your power, what your story is. There's no story that's too small or too big, and don't compare your story to others. Your story's personal, and live it, and just learn from it and grow from it.
Thank you so much. So it is that time. It goes by so fast because we're having such a great conversation. So again, like we do every show, I want to give my husband some love for my pearls and my plants. I promised him that I would. For my birthday, that's what I got, my plants and my pearls. So we want to thank everyone for watching. Dr. Lori, thank you for joining us on the show. The crew, the team, remember to follow us on Facebook. Make sure that you're tuning in on YouTube. Check us out on the web at soundviewtv.org, and we'll see you here next week on Connecticut at your service. See you then.